How do you design a system that most people can't even see? Temple Grandin didn't just think differently. She showed the world that different ways of thinking can change entire industries. Temple Grandin is an autistic scientist, professor, and animal behavior expert. And she is one of the most well known autistic women in academia. Her work has fundamentally changed how livestock are handled, both in the United States and beyond. Not by following existing systems, but by seeing what those systems were missing. So let's talk a little bit about Temple Grandin. So she was born in 1947 and she was diagnosed with autism at a time when autism was definitely not well understood. And it was generally boys that were diagnosed, especially not girls, especially not back in those days. And many professionals believed back then, as some still do now, that autistic children would never function independently. So institutionalization, unfortunately, was often recommended. And in Temple's case, that same recommendation was made to her mother. But her mother refused. And that decision really changed everything because as a child, Temple was non speaking. And she experienced the world in a way that was really overwhelming at times. She was highly sensitive to sound, to the environment, and to small details that other didn't even notice. And as she grew up, she was often labeled as too sensitive, too different, too much. But those exact same traits became the entire foundation of her work. Temple Grandin has described herself as a visual thinker. She doesn't think in words first, she thinks in images and pictures. And she's spoken in depth about being able to run scenarios in her mind visually, to see systems, and to understand environments from a sensory perspective, and became really critical in her work with animals because animals don't process the world through language. They experience it through sight, through sound, through movement and emotion. Um, so then Temple began studying how animals responded to their environment. She was particularly fond of farm animals, and she noticed things that other people didn't miss. She noticed shadows that looked like barriers. She noticed reflections that would startle them, sudden movements, loud noises, things that seemed really insignificant to humans were really overwhelming to animals. So instead of forcing animals to adapt to systems, she redesigned those systems and she developed this curve shoot system for livestock, which has a low stress handling design and created these environments that removed and reduced fear and panic in these livestock that were essentially being processed and understood that what was about to happen to them wasn't great. So, because of her work today, her designs are used across a huge percentage of livestock facilities. And it's to reduce the levels of anxiety, stress, and fear in the animals, and create a more humane process for us as humans to be able to maintain our various farming systems, right? Like a lot of people eat meat and none of us want to think about the food we're about to eat having suffered first. So this work isn't theoretical anymore, right? This is like real world impact at scale. And this is where her work became really personal for me. So I was first reduced to Temple Grandin through a psychologist that I was working with many years ago now. And I remember being absolutely fascinated, not just by what she was saying, but how she was thinking. And I went on to read her book, Thinking in Pictures and Animals Make Us Human. At the time, I was studying psychoanalysis. So I was already trying to understand behavior, to understand patterns and what's happening underneath the surface. But Temple's work shifted something for me because she wasn't theorizing from the outside, she was explaining from the inside. And that changed how I saw people I was working with at the time. I was supporting adults with developmental disabilities and intellectual delays, and many of them were described as nonverbal at the time, but now we would more accurately call them non-speaking. Um, as Temple very rightly introduced us to and talks about a lot, as have many advocates within the community. And there was often this assumption that a lack of speech meant a lack of understanding, right? But Temple's World challenged that completely, her work, sorry. Um, and it opened me up to a different question. And that's, what if the issue isn't that somebody can't communicate, but that we don't yet understand how they do? And that's a very different way of seeing the human condition, because now you're not asking what's missing. You're asking, what am I not seeing? And that shift right there, that changes everything. So Temple has spoken openly about her autism, and she's been really clear about this. Her way of thinking is not a deficit, it's a difference. Her ability to think in pictures allowed her to see what others couldn't, and what might have been labeled as too sensitive, too rigid, too focused was actually precision, pattern recognition, and a very deep sensory awareness. At the same time, she's also spoken honestly about challenge, about social communication, about sensory overwhelm, and the effort required to learn and navigate a world not designed for her. So, this is not a simplified story, it's a real one. Her success didn't come from ignoring those challenges that she faced. It came from understanding them, working with them, and building around them. And what's important here is that Temple Grandin didn't just stop at designing systems. She learned how to communicate, not by becoming someone else and not by masking who she was, but by finding ways to translate how she thinks so other people could understand it. She wrote books, she gave lectures, and she explained autism from the inside out. She helped people see the behavior they maybe didn't understand actually had logic behind it. And that is not a small thing, because it's one thing to think differently, it's an entirely other thing to build a bridge between your world and everyone else's. And she didn't just advocate for animals, she advocated for people, for different ways of thinking, for environments that don't overwhelm, for systems that don't exclude by default. She stepped into spaces that weren't designed for her, and instead of shrinking, she made them bigger. And this is where her story connects to something bigger. For a long time, systems were built expecting people to think the same, behave the same, and respond the same. Temple Grandin didn't fit those systems. So instead of forcing herself to fit, she built systems that worked differently. And now, when you look at her story, she wasn't too much. She wasn't too different. She was seeing things the system wasn't yet built to recognize. And Temple Grandin didn't change, but she certainly changed the narrative, both about animal welfare, about the systems we use in animal husbandry, about herself as a non-speaking autistic person, and for all of the people out there that she has given a voice to, that she has given hope to, and that she has reached, who think maybe in the same way that she does, or maybe differently again, but in hearing her story, know that they're not too much of anything. They're just perfect the way they are, and they'll find their way to communicate authentically in their own time. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. So please leave comments below, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.